What's up guys, this is Sam, and today the first major update for iOS 11 was released. iOS 11.1 came out for everyone earlier today on Tuesday, October 31st, 2017. Happy Halloween, and there's a lot to talk about. New emojis, new gestures, and there's a lot to get into. So let's go ahead and jump in. First up, there are 70 new emojis in iOS 11.1. This is one of the biggest new features that I think a lot of you guys are really going to enjoy. There are so many good ones this time around. This could be my favorite emoji release ever. You have Mind Blown, someone cursing, someone throwing up. You've got woman breastfeeding. I think we need to take a moment, round of applause for that one right there. You've got the orange heart, wizard, vampire, elves, genie, zombie emojis for all of the Walking Dead fans out there, and you finally have a zebra and giraffe emoji now. Giraffe is such a great animal in general, so I'm so happy that I can finally use that in emoji form. And you also have a brontosaurus and a T-Rex as well. So many good emojis here. As always, I love hearing your thoughts. Let me know which ones you are most excited for by leaving a comment down below. Following these 70 new emojis, there was a big feature in iOS 10 that Apple removed with iOS 11, where you could 3D touch on the left side of the screen on a model like the iPhone 6s or the iPhone 7, and of course the brand new iPhone 8, and it would take you into the app switcher. You could swipe from left to right while 3D touching to go back to your previously used app, and that was removed in iOS 11.0, but in iOS 11.1 it has been reintroduced, and it works so much better than before. You can drag it in the middle of the screen and release to go into the app switcher, do a light press and then a harder press on the left side of the screen to go into the app switcher directly, or swipe 3D touching from left to right to go back to your most recently used application. All the animations are buttery smooth, and I think it looks great. Moving on to the Quicktype Keyboard, if you're sending someone a text message and you type in something like fruit or haha, it's going to suggest multiple emojis now rather than just one. You can see for fruit it suggests like watermelon, apple, and banana. For other emojis, sometimes it'll only give you one still. Like if you still say cool, it gives you the person with the sunglasses. I wish it would do it for all phrases, but there is a really good number of new phrases in iOS 11.1 that the Quicktype Keyboard will automatically suggest a good number of emojis for. So it gives you more choice here rather than having to go into the emoji keyboard and search for them manually. Before we jump into the full changelog, there's one other pretty big change in iOS 11.1 that I want to show you. In any scroll view, whether it's Safari or Twitter or settings, when you tap the status bar to go to the top of the page rather than scrolling up, you get a really nice subtle scroll up effect. Before it would just jump to the top, it would be sort of jarring and jagged, but with the new design language in iOS 11 and iOS 11.1 now, when you tap on the status bar to go to the top of the screen, it now slows down and decelerates before just jumping to the top. It's a nice little change, but I'm a big fan. Alright, so those are the major new features in iOS 11.1, but inside the changelog, Apple gives us a look at the other changes and improvements. iOS 11.1 introduces over 70 new emoji. Apple is branding that as the headlining feature in this update and includes bug fixes and improvements. First up, emojis, over 70 new emoji characters, including new food types, animals, mythical creatures, clothing options, more expressive smiley faces, gender-neutral characters, and more. Photos resolves an issue that could cause some photos to appear blurry, addresses an issue that could cause live photo effects to play back slowly, fixes an issue that could cause some photos to not display in the People album when restoring from an iCloud backup, very specific fix right there, and fixes an issue that could impact performance when swiping between screenshots. For accessibility, iOS 11.1 improves Braille support for grade 2 input, improves voiceover access to multi-page PDFs, improves voiceover rotor actions for announcing incoming notifications, improves voiceover rotor actions menu when removing an app from the app switcher. iOS 11.1 fixes an issue for some users where alternative keys would not display when using VoiceOver with touch typing, fixes an issue where VoiceOver Rotor would always return to default action in Mail, and fixes an issue where VoiceOver Rotor would not delete messages. Finally, under other improvements and fixes, iOS 11.1 adds back support for accessing the app switcher by pressing on the edge of the display with 3D touch. That was the second change that we talked about earlier, where you can go into the app switcher. iOS 11.1 fixes an issue that caused cleared mail notifications to reappear on the lock screen, fixes an issue in enterprise environments that prevented data from being moved between managed apps, fixes an issue with some third-party GPS accessories that caused inaccuracies in location data, resolves an issue where settings for heart rate notifications were appearing in the Apple Watch app first generation, and fixes an issue where app icons were not appearing in notifications on Apple Watch. Now, on top of this entire changelog and the other features that we talked about, iOS 11.1 also includes a number of really important security fixes. I want to go over these now. First is for Cortex. The impact was processing a maliciously crafted text file may have led to an unexpected application termination. Next up, under kernel, an application may be able to execute arbitrary code with kernel privileges. For messages, a person with physical access to an iOS device may be able to access photos from the lock screen. Very happy to see that issue fixed, because that's sort of serious if you don't want some random person to be looking at your photos unauthorized. For Siri, it's the same sort of thing. A person with physical access to an iOS device may have been able to use Siri to read notifications of content that is not set to be displayed at the lock screen. Next up, filed under streaming zip, a malicious zip file may be able to modify restricted areas of the file system. For UIKit, characters in a secure text field might be revealed. Also could be a pretty big issue. Lots of changes for WebKit. The impact was processing maliciously crafted web content may lead to arbitrary code execution. And finally, what I would argue to be the most important fix for security in this entire update, we have the Wi-Fi KRACK vulnerability. This was a relatively complicated Wi-Fi issue that affected pretty much every Wi-Fi device on the market, and a lot of manufacturers have been issuing software updates like iOS 11.1 and the latest watchOS, macOS, and tvOS updates as well to correct this issue so that your device is not at risk. I want to briefly go over why this was such a big deal, and because I'm not a security researcher, I didn't totally understand it myself until I went to the internet for help. The Next Web wrote a really great article, one by Matthew Hughes, about describing the KRACK Wi-Fi vulnerability explained like you're 5, and it does do a really great job of breaking it down and helping me and hopefully you guys understand why it's such a big deal. So I'm going to be quoting and paraphrasing things from that article. I'll leave it linked down below if you want to read it for yourself. The way it would work is that a hacker would find a WPA2-PSK encrypted network and wait for someone to connect. Now, once that individual connected, they could automatically see some of their data because there's something called a four-way handshake, which is, quote, a process that checks that the password the user has provided is correct and establishes the encrypted connection between the router and the device. Where the KRACK vulnerability comes into play is that the attacker was able to interfere with this initial handshake, mess with it, and change it so the user wouldn't know that anything was different, but then all of a sudden the hacker would be able to see all of your web data, all the traffic from your device, and they would even be able to put fake things on your screen or make things look a little bit different, changing the content of non-secure websites, and they would even be able to, quote, theoretically be able to inject ransomware or other malware into other benign websites. This would make it easier to infect those users who tend to not download sketchy attachments or visit the darker sides of the internet. So clearly this was a really big deal. This is a massive security breach, one of the biggest Wi-Fi vulnerabilities in recent history, and I think it'll be something that goes down as a big deal in the security industry for a very long time. But nonetheless, it has been fixed in iOS 11.1, so be rest assured your device is not susceptible anymore. Moving on from changes, let's talk about battery life and performance. Those are the two top things that I have heard people talk bad about when it comes to iOS 11. There's a number of people that I know that continue to refuse to update to iOS 11 because they've heard that it's been a little bit rough. And I think the reason that I've had a really positive experience is because I'm using the newest iPad, the newest iPhone 7, the newest iPhone 8. Obviously, it's going to work pretty well on the latest devices. But if you've been using an older device, I've heard the battery life has not been the best. But in my experience with iOS 11.1, I was beta testing it for about a month and a half before making this video. The battery life has been a definite step up and improvement from iOS 11.0, more specifically iOS 11.0.3. It just feels better. I couldn't tell you how many minutes or hours longer it would be, but it definitely feels like a noticeable improvement. So if you have been worried about battery life, go ahead and update to iOS 11.1. And then performance is also so much better in iOS 11.1 than it was in iOS 11.0.3. For example, the unlock animation feels infinitely quicker on my iPhone 7 here than it did in iOS 11.0.3. There's a lot of other small animation tweaks. Some feel slower, but the overall performance of the device does feel a little bit faster. I did run a Geekbench to see if there were any hard numbers behind that hypothesis. My single core score was 3,506 and my multi-core score was 5,761. For some reason, I never ran an 11.0.3 Geekbench on this iPhone 7, but one that I ran on iOS 11.0, I got 3449 for the single core and 5682 for the multi-core. So both those scores on iOS 11.1 for performance are higher than they were on iOS 11.0, and that is just another reason that I would highly recommend updating. Overall, I think iOS 11.1 is a really solid update. The performance and battery life have been better in my experience. There are so many good new features, new emojis, the reintroduction of that 3D touch multitasking gesture, and it feels like a great first update. I don't really know what else I could ask for except additional features, but just yesterday we saw that Apple released iOS 11.2 Beta 1 to developers. So if you're interested in checking out what's new with that, you're welcome to do so by clicking in the top right hand corner of the screen. And as always, I want to hear your thoughts. Now that you've updated to iOS 11.1, or if you're planning to, let me know what you think of the new changes and if any bugs that you were experiencing in early versions of iOS 11 have been corrected, because for me, it just feels so much more stable. If you want to download this iPhone 10 wallpaper, I'll leave a link to that down below if you're interested. If you enjoyed watching this, it does help me out if you drop a like, and of course, hit subscribe for more videos on iOS 11 in the future. I've been Sam, I hope you're doing great, and I'll talk to you in my next video.